This is my Summit tree climber. This is the aluminum version. And it's time to put some new shrink wrap on these cables. Now, as you know, probably if you're watching this video, what happens is these cables wear out. They wear in here, and then this metal starts to damage the aluminum on here, and then it gets worse because now there's a little lip in this section that you'll have to file down. You'll probably need a flat file and a round file. And unfortunately, you got to be careful because you don't want to take too much out of there. And now your stand's dangerous. You've reduced the amount of contact that your cable has with your stand. So you got to be careful with the filing. But really on this video, and I'm making this as much for myself as everybody else out there to refer back to as to what kind of shrink wrap you need on this, because if you're like me, you delay this too long and it's hard to get the new Summit shrink wrap in a timely manner, and so you go to other sources. And I'm going to go over what sizes and types of shrink wrap you need to buy for this thing. But basically, we're going to cut this old shrink wrap off and put our new on, and then clean this area up with a file so it lasts a little longer. So anyway, let's get to it. First thing I'm going to cover is what size shrink wrap. Here's where I currently bought it. It was 18 bucks shipped, and this place was really quick about getting it shipped. I bought it on eBay. And I took some measurements before I ordered things. The hexagonal, it looks round, but this has a slight hexagon shape. At its widest point, it's 0.610 inches, and its narrowest point on this ferrule, I guess you'd call it, is 0.585 inches. Now that could technically mean, oh, and the cable is a 1/4 inch, 0.250 inches. So that could technically mean you could get a 5/8 inner diameter shrink wrap and get it on here. But what everybody recommends is 3/4, because 5/8 is barely going to fit around this thing. So the thing to order is a 3/4 inch, and you're going to have to make sure it's this 3-to-1 rather than 2-to-1. 2-to-1 is going to is not going to get tight around the cable, so it has to be the 3-to-1. So when you start with 3/4 inch here at the 3, it'll narrow down to 0.25 inches, which is exactly the diameter of that cable. Now this company, I'll give you this website, they sell rolls of this. So if you have several stands, or if you're an outfitter that gets some hunters in that bring their own climbers, it might be nice to just buy a roll of this stuff, but that'll get a little more expensive. This particular place was fairly cheap to get rolls. Didn't look like it was much more expensive than going to other sources, buy heat shrink. .com, and it's this polyolefin heat shrink tubing is the most common type that I found, and the type that this company is suggesting for your Summit climbers. It even describes Summit climbers down here at the bottom. You definitely don't want the glue on the inside, which is really common. You think, oh boy, I want a thicker one. The problem with the thicker materials for the shrink wrap is excuse me, that it has a glue on the inside. Now, I verified that what this company sold me is 3/4 inch. Take my word for it, I already measured the outside of this fat permanent marker. It is exactly 0.750 inches, and it does barely squeeze in there. It's also a sign that if you buy 5/8 rather than 3/4, it's going to be too tight of a fit around those ferrules. So this is the right size. 3/4 inch, 3-to-1 ratio heat shrink, polyolefin heat shrink tubing. I'm going to come back to you after I've cut it off, and I'll show you heat shrinking it. Probably another important measurement to you. Actually, I'm just going to cut back. So this other part that I wanted to show you, you can see how much overlap there is on this current heat shrink that's on there. I kind of like about 3 or 4 inches of overlap off the end of the cable, because it helps guide it back in there when you're reassembling this, or when you're putting the cable back in the stand. Kind of works as a guide, and you need just a little bit of overlap so that cable end is not scratching the inside part of your stand. The cable itself measures 65 inches in length, and the one that's currently on here, the heat shrink, measures 71. I measured those earlier. This Conky Outdoors, I think they're called. Yeah, this Conky Outdoors, the length of this one is only 68 inches. So we're going to have to stage this so there's about 1.5 inches overlap off one end before we start working with the heat shrink. Now, to cut this old heat shrink off, I found it's easiest to put it in a vise before I get out my razor knife to cut the old off of there. And this is a really dangerous part, obviously, because you kind of have to hold this while you cut. Obviously, you want to hold it back in here and cut that section. You don't want that razor blade on your box cutter to be close to your hand. Really easy to cut yourself with that. So put it in a vise and it'll be easier for you to work with to cut that thing off of there. Also, like I already described, you don't want to put the cable end in your vise because you don't want to bend up the end of that cable and fray the end any more than necessary. You want it to remain as intact as possible. So don't put the cable end in your vise, just the overhang of that shrink tubing, put that in. So I'm not starting up here because I don't want that to come apart while I'm cutting. I'll come back to that part that's in the vise at the very end to get it off. Remember to move your hand back, of course. Be very careful. We've made our cut all the way down. Now we just peel that stuff off. There you go, it's that easy. Now we're going to feed our new heat shrink back on. And we're going to remember to overlap each end by the same amount, which should be roughly 1.5 inches on this one. You can see how easily that 3/4 inch goes on, and then when we get our heat gun on it, you'll get to see how tight it engages the cable. Binding up a little bit down there by the time you get it all the way on. I really don't think a 5/8 would fit. See, I damaged that a little bit because I was forcing from the other end, so be careful not to do that. Do as I say, don't do as I do. If you're getting any resistance, the other end is probably caught on it again. We're roughly centered in there now, and so I'm going to go get the heat gun. I got it out for another project. Here it is. I suppose you could use a lighter, but that's going to take forever and you're going to risk burning it. I'm going to feel the ends again, make sure I've got it centered. Because as soon as it heat shrinks around that first ferrule, it's going to be stuck in that position. And this will take quite a few minutes. So I'm going to stop the video right here and not bore you with this whole process, but you get the idea now. All right, there we go. We're finished with this whole cable. Something you want to do is when you heat this end up to shrink it completely, you want to make sure it stays fairly straight. So as it's cooling, make sure this is not bent over or it's going to cause problems for you funneling it back into your deer stand. This will get pretty firm once it's cooled off, but that's really pliable, obviously, because there's no cable on the inside when you're done heating it. Now this is the part where we go back in and clean the damage up with a file. It's a pretty bad lip on that one. It's probably not showing on camera very well, but where that ferrule has been rubbing on the aluminum. So like I said, be really careful how much you take off, but you do want to take that, work that file back a couple times and take that lip off so it doesn't immediately damage your new shrink wrap job. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful for you.